Hello and welcome back to the Futurism at JHU podcast. My name's Nicholas. I'm your host, joined with co-host John. And today we have a special episode. We have Kristen here as a guest speaker. So Kristen, I'd love if you could just introduce yourself, who you are, what you're majoring in, your interests, goals, whatever you want to share with us.
Everything. Darkest secrets.
Deepest, darkest
right
secrets.
Here,
everything.
Live on camera. So hi everyone, if you don't know me, my name is Kristen Corlay. I'm a junior now at Hopkins. I study Civil and Systems Engineering here, and I'm also the co-president of Eclectics, which is our all-inclusive dance team. So I'm a big fan of dance. I've danced since I was 4, and so being part of, a dance group here, especially after we were all separated during COVID, has been one of the most rewarding experiences ever. And another thing that I'm really passionate about is about gender equality, including women in STEM, but also driving civic engagement and making sure we have open data and accessibility with Congress information, which is what we're going to talk about today. And so because of that, I'm also the co-founder of Cabilde, which is Mexico's first basically web app that will focus on civic engagement. We're still in development, but I would love to talk more about why this issue matters so much.
So my first question is actually, what does Cabilde mean?
Yeah.
I should know this because I'm taking Spanish, but...
No, honestly, I didn't really know much about that word, even when we started doing it, and it kind of fell upon us, and we're like, oh, this is kind of what we're trying to do. So Cabilde comes from the word Cabildo, which is basically an assembly or a place where people go in and discuss ideas of their community. And so we're like, well, okay, we can't just call it a cabildo, which is, it has also different meanings. I'm sure by taking Spanish, you go to Spain, that's another meaning. You go to Mexico, other meaning. Go to Colombia, that's a whole different thing. And even within Mexico, we changed the very definitions of our words. But basically, the inspiration was take this idea of a space where people comment on their community and put it on the web. So that's where the E came from, because you're like, oh, nice to meet you, e-news, all that stuff from the internet. So that's kind of why we changed it to Cabilde. So it's bringing those conversations and giving them a space online.
That's so cool. So could you tell us a little bit about what Cabilde is? How does it work?
Yeah. So basically it all started, I'm not sure if you want to give you the backstory of how that came to be, because I feel that will make so much more sense that if I were to tell you what it does and you're like, but why? So basically, I've been in we like to call it here the social change ecosystem. I learned that from the Center for Social Concern here at Hopkins, and I've been part of that basically since I was 16, back in my home in Monterrey, Mexico, which is where I'm from and where I grew up and where I've basically lived my entire life. And I got super involved with this organization called Girl Up, and it works with empowering girls in their own community to lift other women up. And so we would do a lot of things like fundraising for NGOs. We would do conferences and panels, and we didn't really get into actual lobbying or congressional stuff actually until we came to Washington for the Girl Up Leadership Summit. And they had this whole lobbying day where they went and talked to the representative about a Girls Education Act, and that was not really common back home. I didn't even know you could just go talk to your representative. So when I saw everyone was oh yeah, I've talked to my representative a month before about a different topic, and I was like, you can do that? I was like, you can go to Congress, you can go to this place, it's an open space. And so when we came back home, we really wanted to bring those ideas and really put them into action. So we did the first youth girl parliament in my state. So it was a day where girls would go and basically be part of parliament for a day and learn about how parliament works and how the Congress works. And so that was really cool in our first dive into Congress. But then something that we noticed was that whenever something was going on in Congress, a very important bill was going to be voted. So whether it was the legalization of abortion, for example, or whether it was trying to create better menstruation laws or gender violence things, the way the government operates is they would keep everything very hush hush. So they wouldn't even publish the agenda for the day, and then they also wouldn't show how people voted. So if you wanted to like see how your representative voted, you had to like be watching a live stream or like be basically online all the time, and then you would have to check Twitter and hope that someone would have taken a screenshot of how like a representative voted, because these can be like very controversial topics at points, and they wanted to, I guess, minimize the amount of like activists who were like at the doors and being like, hey, like, you know, give us our rights and everything. So that's kind of like where the inspiration of Cabilde started. We wanted to make it easy for people to check how their congressperson voted in Congress. And so basically how it works and how we're trying to make it work is we have this searcher where you can just look up your address and look up who your representative is and very easily find a way to contact them. So we have this feature where you can just like, it drafts the email for you basically on like what issue you care about and like what you want to tell your representative and all those things. And then also the most important feature I would say is we're trying to make a data scraper of the government database, and basically scrape that data of how Congress representatives voted and put it on a more accessible way, so people can just look at bills with like keywords and like go in and find out like how the representative voted. So that's the main idea of what Cabilde is and how it came to be.
That's genius.
Awesome.
That is so
Thank
smart.
you.
That is, and it was just, it's kind of upsetting a little that it's like we have so much like, I don't know, unrest in terms of policy as it is in the US. Imagine, you know, in other places where the situation is like what you described, where it's like it's very hush hush, very secretive, and you don't even know what's happening. Like at least here we know, you know, most politicians at least wear their heart out on their sleeve in terms of, and sometimes to a fault, I'll say, but you know, at least you know what they believe in to a certain extent, you know. But I think that's a really, really smart idea.
Yeah.
But I want to ask, how does the government feel about this? Because if they're purposefully like kind of keeping everything on the low, and you're trying to bring everything to light and make everybody a lot more involved and knowledgeable about everything that goes on, are you on the map for the government? Like, do they endorse you? Are they kind of indifferent, or are they kind of upset?
No, that's a really good question, because that's something that we were even thinking about when we wanted to get started on this. And even though we're still in development, we wanted to very early on, like I went to like my own local Congress representative, and I was like, this is a really big issue that I really care about. I was wondering like if you knew what was going on. And actually a really funny thing, kind of scary thing too at the same time, is when I went and saw my local representative, I brought him my laptop with the Congress website. And I was like, okay, hi, I'm Kristen. I really care about the environment, for example, and I want to see how you voted on this specific bill. Can you look that information up for me? And I had him navigate the Congress website, and he could not find even the way that he voted, because the way the data is displayed is they have like these long Excel worksheets that are published like 3 months after the voting already happened. So like if it's a very controversial topic, people forget about it and they just post it online and they're like, oh, we're so transparent. And it's like, no way, because unless you have Excel and you have the account, you cannot look at the sheet. And also everything's like encoded and stuff, so you can't even like very like adequately go and see like how each person voted. And he didn't even know how that worked. And so I think Congress knows there is an issue, they're just not prioritizing as much. And a really big thing of why Cabilde is working the way that it is right now is we're starting with the local Congress of Nuevo León, which is the state where I'm from, because every state has their own system of organizing data. So if we make a data scraper for the data of Nuevo León, it's not gonna work for Chiapas, for example. So that's a really big issue that we're trying to like go through. But also, what we hope is to prove with the platform that this is something people want and that the government should invest in. And if we were able to do it as like college students, like why shouldn't you like ask the government with all your resources be able to do it? So the Congress representatives that we talked to seem like very excited about it. Like they're very hopeful about it. but at the same time, they haven't done much action on their part to support initiatives in Congress, like data transparency, like having those conversations to even like help us do our work even better. So hopefully once they see that the platform works, that is something people use and people want, we also hope to actually make a Congress initiative or something so that this can be now like the norm and it's not going to be reliant on like college students like doing this in their free time.
Just out of curiosity, how does, like, I don't know a lot about like Mexico and how the government works. Like, how is it organized, like in contrast to how the US is organized? Because I know you mentioned like parliament. So is it like...
It's kind of weird because I see parliament, but that was like the name of the event. It was called the Pink Parliament, Parlamento Rosa. And but it's basically like Congress, like like in the US, like you have your Congress representatives. It's just, I also feel like the way we talk about like government and policy, we use so many words interchangeably, I think, like back home too. So like it is like a Congress, like that would be the official word, but I think for the event we just called it the Pink Parliament because it sounded pretty too. But yeah, so it's kind of similar like in the US in that sense, where like you have your like your local representative, but it is different because we don't have like a two-party system like the US has like very known for. So you would have multiple parties like in Congress and then also like in the presidency, and sometimes they band together and they make coalitions. So like it's as if you had, I don't know, like the purple and the orange and like the red parties, and then in some states they might like compete independently, but then they're like, you know what, we should band together because we don't want the blue party to win, and then they form like the tricolor like party. And so that's kind of like something that they do a lot. And also Mexico, we have like a plurinominal system. So like basically in the US, like you vote for like the candidate you want to win for your like local representative, right? So you typically go like blue or like red, or like sometimes they have other parties, but like that's typically how it works. And then it's like the winner takes it all, right? Like it doesn't matter if the race was like really close or like all those things, like this person won. But here we have some spaces in Congress for actually people who really put up a fight in their elections and like got a lot of votes. And so you're able to give them those seats to kind of give proportional representation to those people. So that's a really, that's a difference that we have too.
Got it. So diving into the more technical side, I'm very curious, like, how the process of like the app development has been. Like, do you have like a team of like kind of computer science people like working with you, and like do you have any like funding, or is it more like something you're kind of doing as like a volunteer kind of thing?
Right. So we started working on this like fall of 2020. So it's been like almost 2 years now, and it's such a long process that I didn't realize when you're creating something basically from scratch. So I remember like the first year we really focused on like, I guess you could call it like customer discovery in that sense, although we're not a traditional business in that sense, but you have to treat it as is in like the design process. And so we interviewed activists, we interviewed students, we interviewed Congress people who had nothing to do with Congress and all those things. And we talked to them about like what they would want in a web app, or like from little things like, oh, would you want the button to be here or over there? And we would show them like these frames that I created about like what we wanted it to look like. And then we would also just like interview them about like, you know, what would you say to your representative and how would you want to say it? And so that's kind of like what the first like initial months of it was. And then trying to create like a proof of product, like a wireframe for that. And so I started it with, my co-founder's name is Valeria Colunga, and we've known each other since we worked in Girl Up together. And so she studied policy and Latin American studies, like international, I think it's called international development, international issues. And so she's currently at Oxford right now, but she did the University of Texas at Austin for undergrad. So it's really crazy because we started it while I remember I was like at home. I mean, we all were like starting like our freshman year of college. And then she was originally at Austin, and then the pandemic happened. So like she had to come back in Mexico. She's like a year ahead of I am. So it's crazy because she graduated also a year early from college. So like I'm a junior and now she's like a whole like freshman at Oxford, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like how crazy how time passed. So she would take care of like the administrative part, like the entrepreneurial parts and the policy parts, and I kind of led the team in just like creating wireframes and thinking about like data. And that's also when I personally started getting really into coding and really into data. Like I did nothing of that in high school. Like I was part of my high school robotics team, but I did the community engagement part. Like I would teach kids like Lego Mindstorms or like do stuff like for the community. Like I wouldn't do a lot of stuff regarding the robots or anything. So this was my first time that I was like, okay, now I'm the tech person and I need to learn how to code, and I need to learn how to do data mapping. I need to learn all these things. And so that's kind of like how it started at first. And then once we kind of did that for about like, I don't know, like 9 months or so, we were able to get funding by the University of Texas at Austin and also by the Life Design Lab here at Hopkins. And so Valeria and I met a summer at UT Austin, and we just worked on Cabilde like basically the whole summer. Actually, like I made a map where like you could find your representatives, and this was while Congress elections were going on. So like all the data we were going to be starting with was basically data that was being formed during that summer. So that was like a really productive summer. And then we joined Fast Forward U here at Hopkins fall 2021. And so they were able to provide funding for us to do all these things. And most of our funding goes to like licenses, whether that is like having like the Google G Suite and like having more space like for getting a lot of data and everything. But something that we recently started doing basically this year is we want to create like student kind of like internships to actually help code the app itself. So like the wireframes exist, like we know what things have to go on, we know like what features need to be made, and so that's basically what we're doing right now for Cabilde. And it's very interesting because I feel like a lot of people who are part of like, you know, like startup culture and everything is very all about like the hustle culture. I remember that's a lot of it is very noticeable, like whenever you're part of an accelerator or something. So you work so much, and then the aftermath of the accelerator is a very critical point, because you go from working something like very intensely to like, oh, now I'm like kind of on my own. And we definitely struggled on that end, especially because, well, I mean, Valeria was literally just moved continents, like, so that's always like really hard because we're already working remotely, and now we're working remotely and with a time difference. And so we're still working on coordinating our team. We're onboarding some new student interns on the team, so I'm really excited about that. But yeah, I mean, just being like really honest, like it's definitely like really hard when you're like a college student and like you're still figuring out your life, you're moving into your first apartment, and you're still working on like an app. So it's definitely like a struggle in that sense.
I kind of had like a side question.
Yeah.
Because I've taken like some like intersession, you know, like 3-week coding classes, like R, Python, MATLAB. I'm very curious, like how you learned coding. Like, was it through classes, or did you kind of like self-teach or mix?
Yeah, so I learned to code actually in an intersession class.
Oh, okay.
Called like, I think it was called like Dirty Data, the Art of Data Cleaning. And it was like an R class during intersession. And R was like my first like real programming language, because I'm not counting the little Lego Mindstorm or C+ that we did in Arduino.
I'd count that.
You count that? Okay.
Any experiences?
Lego Mindstorm.
It'll be my third one then, because we did
put
C++
that on
and
your resume.
I'll put it on a resume? Okay. Yeah. I'll keep it in mind now that I'm applying to stuff. Thank you. So basically, like, I took a little R course, and it was like very intense for like 2 weeks. I think it was like 2 to 3 weeks or something. It was 2 credits, and like I would have homework every day. And that was like my first time like actually challenging myself and like learning like a coding language. And then I took Gateway Python, but I hate to say this, I loved my Python professor. Like Dr. Miller, you're like an amazing professor, like one of my favorite professors ever. But it felt like the class like didn't give you the best skills to actually use Python practically. So I feel like I learned more in 2 weeks like learning R than like Gateway Python for a whole semester, even though those were my favorite TAs and my favorite professor. But there's only so much you can learn from Cybooks, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like project-based learning is so important, and I think that, you know, I've learned a lot outside the classroom versus like in a classroom setting for coding. But I have to like just give like huge kudos to Andrew, who like really helped develop Cabilde like in its first stages, because he codes in Julia, and he's been coding for like years, like over 10 years or something. And so like when we were still trying to get something up, like he really helped us like make that first, I guess you could call it like the beta version of the app. And so even though he's like currently not working with us anymore, like he was just such a fundamental part in that initial stages of last year. So yeah, it's kind of like how we've managed the coding, but there's only so much I can do. Like I'm not a computer science student. Like I don't know data structures. I don't know how to do a backend. And so we're really trying to get computer science students to be the ones like also running that very technical side.
That's amazing. I see like all of the hallmarks of like, this is going to be really good. Yeah. You put in so much time. You're now outsourcing. It's just a fantastic idea in general. And it's really impressive. I can't believe I haven't heard about this.
Yeah, no, we've definitely kept it on like, I wouldn't say to download. Like I think like most of our Steam was 2021, and 2022 I think we're just starting to pick up Steam again. And a lot of it was just because we're also trying to figure out our team out, because it's so hard when you're working. I mean, I mentioned like Valerie was like in UT Austin, and so she was like technically in her senior year at that point. And so imagine coordinating all of that while she's also trying to figure out like, am I gonna get a full-time job? Like, am I gonna go to grad school? And then I was also figuring out my life because I had a pretty rough start to 2022. Like I had a lot of things happen personally in my life that I started, like really trying to prioritize my mental health and trying to like slow down on so many things. And even like sophomore spring, probably the hardest classes that I've taken for my major in general. And so it was really hard like balancing all that. And so we really had to take a step back in development in the spring to like, okay, we need to figure out like what are we doing in our lives, like not just personally like with Cabilde, but also where am I gonna live? Like I need to cook for myself, I need to like take care of my bills and everything. And so I think it's very important to stress when we're talking about like like being part of a student venture and everything. Like yes, it all sounds like really cool, and it's so weird because I feel like I don't give myself credit a lot of times until I'm talking about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I did that. Like that's actually kind of cool, and I think we need to like acknowledge like our work oftentimes. But it is like, you go through valleys. Like I would say like we were at a peak in Fast Forward You, and then like you go down sometimes a little bit and you have to slow down. And now we're picking up steam again, trying to pick up the project again now that Valerie is at Oxford, and now she's able to like actually know her schedule. Like she didn't know her class schedule until like 2 weeks ago. So it's really hard coordinating stuff, but I'm really excited to where we're going to take the team. And like now that we have like this vision and really like carrying it out, I think it's going to be the biggest challenge, but I'm really excited for it.
So no point has it ever crossed your mind like, oh, I gotta quit this? Like you're really, really in it now. Like,
I'm really in it now. And I definitely think there's been like points where we're thinking like, oh, like, should we be doing this? Because I remember like a lot of representatives, there was like some murmurings like in Congress that maybe they might be doing something similar to it. Like that's what a part of me was like, kind of like, should we keep it hush hush? Should we not keep it hush hush? Because it's like, I don't like talking a lot about projects while they're still in development, because I mean, there's always like the whole thing, like someone's gonna steal your idea and do it. We're not the first people or the first group to start this. Like there's even a group in Mexico that has tried doing this for 7 years. Like that's how hard it is to work on an app like this, just because of all the hurdles of even getting the data, like even coding, even going through like all the policy like hurdles and all that stuff. So, and we're actually like working with them now, like we've contacted them. So I think it's one of those things that it's really hard when you're like, yes, I'm working on this really cool thing, and they're like, when is it going to be released? And I'm like, I don't know. And it's always like so weird because you get such imposter syndrome by that. Like you feel so bad, like it's not out yet, but it is something that you're actually working in a lot of stuff. So I remember like last year I would spend so much time on Cabilde, and like literally during classes, like I would have meetings with like lawyers and stuff because we're figuring out how we were going to incorporate like as an NGO, as a LLC, like as of all of those things. And I was like, I feel like I'm working so many hours and like no one else is seeing that because we're still in development. And so that's really what propelled us to be a little more open about like our journey and like just showing like how real it can be. Like yes, like sometimes you get to do a really cool interview like this, or you get to like, I've been to panels on like student entrepreneurs and talking about Cabilde and stuff, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, you're so amazing, you're so great. But we all go through our struggles, and like it is like not everyone sees a lot of the work that goes into it. And so, at those moments, like sometimes you think like, would it be easier if I just like drop a towel and just like spend more time doing other stuff? But I think what has made us like be even more, I guess, like focus on like the work that we want to do and like seeing the vision is actually being able to take those breaks and, like see what it would be like without it. And like at the end of the day, like I feel like this is something that needs to be done. Like I've never felt that much about like passionate about a project before until we started doing this from scratch. Like there's so many projects that we've done that like, like maybe it's like an existing club or like something you're carrying on, but I feel like when you're doing something from scratch that like came to you as an idea, it's just like a whole other level of wanting to develop it. But it's important also to not make it your entire life. Like Cabilde is not my entire life, it's part of my life. Yeah.
That's yeah, I was just thinking about it because you're really kind of like, I feel like startups and like ventures are kind of like glamorized.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like showing that it's tough. Like it's tough. Like you have to balance like, this amazing venture that you're pursuing and also life, right? And there's a lot of, practical stuff that you need to deal with in life. Also got me thinking about kind of like the long-term maybe mission of your, or kind of other uses, once you're able to develop the app. I think most countries kind of struggle with civic engagement in general. Yeah. The US has a huge voter turnout problem. I think the last election was maybe like I don't want to just throw stats out there.
You're like, I don't want to spread misinformation.
But I feel like it was like 50% of eligible voters or something, or like 50 or 60%. Yeah, I don't want to throw out numbers, but I think it was somewhere around there. And like that's a huge issue. Like I was gonna mention this earlier. In my physics class, we did our professor does like eye clicker polls, which is basically he puts out a poll and you can like answer on your phone. Yeah. And he asked about elections and who's voting in the upcoming elections, and I think it was about like 60% said they were going to vote. Wow. And the other like 40% was either I'm not eligible to vote. I think 10% was not eligible to vote. 20% was like I'm not sure. And when you say I'm not sure, that's like
that means no.
That's probably means no. And then like 10% was like definitely not. So I'm like, that is a big issue.
How could you say I'm definitely not voting in this election? It's like, what?
I just there's this belief that your vote doesn't matter. It's like even like thinking about sustainability, right? It's like you think that your actions, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Like if you don't, I don't know, waste a plastic water bottle or a straw or something, right? Like that's not going to make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. But if everyone thinks that way, that's a huge impact.
Yeah, you get the Great Pacific Garbage Patch floating out in the middle of the ocean.
So like same thing with civic engagement. It's like people think their vote doesn't matter. In a way that's true. Like a single vote is probably not going to make a huge difference, but if everyone has that mentality, or like half of people have that mentality, that's a huge issue. And like just in these past couple of years in the US, I don't know about Mexico, but it's been pretty tense elections. Like people are very, very polarized. And like I think it's very important that we get as much voter participation as possible. One organization that comes to mind is Hopkins Votes here. Yes. I know they've been trying to like get people to vote. They like give out t-shirts. I got a t-shirt. So I think that like organizations like that are really important. But I think apps like yours as well like could be applicable in other countries like the US in particular, and maybe other Latin American countries or European countries, Asian countries. I don't know how the voting systems are in other countries.
Very recently I went onto the US Congress website.
Yeah.
And it's not so bad actually. It's pretty good.
It has some really good guidelines. We're actually basing a lot of it off their guidelines.
So like maybe I have no clue where you're at, and I don't know if this is a void suggestion, but maybe you could try like data scraping the US one. Yeah. And like maybe if it's that tough to access that data in Mexico, maybe you could like make your system accustomed to the US one where it'd be pretty easy to like go through and see everything. And then you have the infrastructure, you know, and then you could apply it to something a little more difficult like Mexico, but what do I know? You know what I mean?
No, you're actually like right on the money, because the US government actually is pretty transparent with like, well, depends who you ask, and also depends what part of the government, but when it comes to open data and like their website and the way to display it, they actually have these guidelines of how to make good Congress websites that like all the websites follow this. And so a lot of what we have is actually based on that, because it actually follows like ADA guidelines, and it talks about like how you should display information. And it's little things that we don't really think about. Like we think about publishing something and we're like, oh, we'll just upload the PDF. Can you come and find on most PDFs? Like sometimes you can, sometimes you cannot. Like it needs to be transcribed a certain way. You want to have the voice version of something in case someone like cannot read it. So like the Congress, like you're right. Like the U.S. Congress does have those features, and it's been like a long struggle to like actually get those features on them. And I think a lot of it is because people need that data. Like we actually need like that data to be informed, but I think not a lot of people know that the data is out there already for the US government.
That's the biggest issue. It's like it's embarrassing for me to say I've been voting for almost 3 years.
Yeah.
And I didn't ever go on this website until like last month or something like that. So it's like, you know, it's a real issue. It's like, yeah, it's out there, but who is going to go and look at that?
Right.
I think one thing just off the top of my head, what if like news organizations reported on, you know, when you vote on a bill and they said like, oh, you know, the majority of Democrats voted this way, the majority of Republicans voted this way. One interesting highlight was that this particular representative voted against their party and something like that. And that could be like a little news article that people click on and actually find out what's going on, because we, you know, news is such a powerful thing that we see now. Yeah. It's such a big deal.
Yeah.
News and controlling information and stuff like that. So what if, you know, every once in a while Fox News, CNN puts out like, oh, they just voted on this really important bill. See how your representatives voted on it. And that, I think, would be a little more accessible than going to the government website and looking it up. Because, you know, it's a really great website. It kind of has a very old, archaic user interface. And I don't think that I would visit that very often, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But I do read a lot of news articles. So, you know, maybe I'd keep track of what is updated on the Congress website if they put it in a nice, digestible, you know, form.
Yeah, definitely. There's actually some apps in the US that like we were able to not base it off, but like talk to the founders about like how their journey was. So I would recommend like checking out Issue Voter. It's this app that basically you can put your information, you can have your representative, and you can kind of like see the issues that you care about, and you get notifications about like, oh, like X person just voted on a bill related to like climate justice. And so it could be something. So you get those notifications. There's an app that used to be called Countable. I think it's now called Issues. It also does something similar on like putting news in like a very digestible way, because I feel like our generation, we get a lot of our news from social media in itself, like instead of just like going out and like reading the newspaper, which is like what other generations would do. And I think it's really important that, you know, we have access to too much information, but we're also able to be critical to digest it and to be able to, you know, select like what is actually like information that I need to know and that is like real and that it's not like completely biased. I think that's a really big, I think that's probably like one of the most challenging things for our generation when it comes to information. So definitely check out Issue Voter, Issues. And then there's also like an app called Turn Up Activism, and it's like for activists to like connect with each other for issues that they care about. So that's also a really cool thing. You can check it out. And yeah, we were able to talk to the founders of Issue Voter. Her name is Maria. She's a UT Austin alum, I think. That's how we connected with her. And it was really interesting seeing how she talked about how those things have changed in the US Congress. Like before, they wouldn't even give them like the API. So if you wanted to do anything like based on like the server of the Congress website or getting their data and be able to scrape it. You couldn't do that. And now the government does put out their API, and they do have things in like a more open data format. And so I think this shows that like there is hope. There is hope.
Yeah,
there is a long way to go, but there is hope.
It'll work. These things that we're talking about,
yeah.
Your venture, all of these other apps, civic engagement, efforts in general, they work, at least in some small part. You mentioned we have like a huge voter turnout issue, but these past elections have had the most voter turnout, I think, in history, right? I think the presidential elections, there was like a record because everybody wanted to come out and vote. Because there were a ton of on both sides of the spectrum, everybody's like, yeah, come out, support your guy or gal, and just do it because it's important. And the way I see it, at least, it's kind of your duty. You live in a really, for better or for worse, a pretty good country. As it stands, there's a lot to be fixed, and it's your duty to help and try to fix that. And of course, there's a lot of institutional things that are very much more unfixable or hard to fix, but I think the least you could do as a member of this country is to really turn out, make your opinion heard, because you have lived a whole life in the place that you live, wherever that may be, and you are formed by the experience you had, partially by the country that you live in. So, being able to give back in that small way, just casting a ballot, so important. And so I think that's the really beautiful thing about these sort of programs and things that we're talking about today, is that it's so important. It's not just a business. It's not just, something for you. It's something for like the whole country. So.
Well, there you have it, listeners. John is telling you, go vote. Go be engaged in the community. Leverage these awesome apps that are out there, the ones that already exist and the ones that are being developed. Voting is, as you said, John and Kristen, like, it's so critical. Even if you think your vote doesn't matter, it truly matters, because you're helping, vote in representatives who are going to decide your future, right? And your future matters, and you want to have some piece in how the country shapes out and the kind of developments and policies that are important to you. If you have an upcoming election and you can vote, go vote. Go encourage your friends, your family, classmates, everyone to vote. Thank you, Kristen, for coming in. It was awesome talking with you. I appreciate all the amazing insights on your app. Good luck with development.
Thank you.
Can't wait to hear some updates on how it's going. And so this has been speaker episode with Kristen.
Yay.
And we'll see you on the next one.
Which camera?
Thank you for having me.
I'm looking at that one. Bye.
Bye.